Hmm. Hey, Peter.
Good morning. Good to see you.
It's good to hear you too. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Thanks for everyone for being punctual. We usually open up the doors at this time and wait a couple of minutes for people to show up. But we could start with a round of introductions for those who are punctual.
Yeah, it would be great.
Peter, you've spoken up. Where in the world are you?
I'm an hour north of New York City, overlooking the Hudson River.
Where exactly, Peter? I know that area pretty well.
Austining?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my sister's in Cold Spring.
Oh, nice.
Not too far. Yeah. Who's next?
Well, I can go next. Meanwhile, so my name is Michelle. I'm founder and CEO of Envisioning Technology Foresight Institute. And I'm currently based in Porto, Portugal, where it's nice and sunny right now.
Yeah, and I was just going to build on that and say that I'm Luma, also here on behalf of Envisioning. I'm based in Amsterdam. Yeah, someone from Sao Paulo, Ivan. Nice to have you with us.
So these sessions can be joined. You can join them listening by all means, or watching the recording, and they're also encouraged to be interactive and participative. But we'll keep the optionalities there for according to your preference. We have fewer people joining.
Yeah, and I guess in addition to that, we really are here to have a conversation with you all. So would love to hear what you think as well. We're not necessarily here to bestow any information or ideas that we have, but really challenge concepts and explore contexts as we think about them ourselves as well. For those of you who don't know, we've been doing this now for hi, Giovanni. Giovanni's in Italy, it seems. Welcome. We've been doing these conversations now for over a year, exploring different topics. And in a way, today's topic is really interesting because it almost brings us full circle before we take a break for the summer. We've been talking a lot about, different realms of existence and reality throughout all our conversations, and we've been asked to also do specific topics on even the metaverse or death and these kind of different experiences that one can have. And so we thought it would be interesting to have a conversation around dimensionality and what that means when we think about technologies, as well as how it impacts our culture. Yeah, so I think, what do you think, Michelle? Shall we just get started?
I think we just did, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I did. I kind of did just start. So welcome everybody. Yeah, and so as I mentioned, we're often talking about these ideas of dimensionality and crossing over into different realms of meaning and existence as we talk about the intersections of culture and tech. And so we thought we'd start, or we'd have this conversation, our last conversation for this season, exploring dimensionality, and start with the question, how does technology challenge our accepted reality? And I was thinking about
course,
this a little earlier. Sorry?
I was going to say, which of course there's no easy answer to. We're pitching pitching the ball to the group, and we do want to encourage participation and thinking through these challenge or this question with us. Especially, we can start by breaking down a little bit, which is to possibly begin with what we understand by dimensionality. So I think we're tossing a lot of concepts into the ring. So exploring the intersection of technology and culture, which can mean a ton of things. Technology is fairly open-ended and culture even more so. But how do we define dimensionality? Does anyone want to take a stab at what they consider to be different dimensions? Don't be shy. So a few people connecting now. Yeah, Lou, what are you gonna say?
No, I was just going to say dimensionality is quite abstract. And we intentionally chose it that way to allow kind of for a wider perspective of what it could mean when we think about tech and culture. And Peter, I see maybe you have something to say.
Yes, there was a book that came out in the early 90s, Cyberspace First Steps, by Benedict, popping the Amazon link into the chat. And it provided a taxonomy of dimensions. And it was talking about how to visualize and manipulate higher dimensional spaces. And one of the ideas was that some dimensions have essentially only like one dimension to them, like ray dimensions, that it had other dimensions that could be considered intrinsic and represented within a single point on display versus extrinsic dimensions, which could be represented spatially. Very fascinating book. There are a couple chapters there that are really oriented towards building visualizations and systems. But of course, when it came out, we didn't have the JavaScript ecosystem and D3 and all the wonderful libraries and tools that you could have employed to actually build it. So it did all the nice theory work. And that was like one hunk of the book. Then another hunk of the book was looking at the culture topics and tying into cyberpunk literature, liquid architectures in cyberspace. Really a fascinating and critical volume. Sadly out of print, but there are enough copies floating around that you can pull a used one with absolutely no difficulty.
Very cool. I clicked on the link and it says, cyberspace has been defined as an infinite artificial world where humans navigate an information-based space. Sounds very dimensional. And then there's this idea that it continues that it's as the ultimate computer human interface. So yeah, I was earlier starting to say that when I think about dimensionality, and even though we intentionally chose it to be something a little vague to see where we could go with it, where it would take the conversation, I also feel like there's such an invitation for it to be something that is an exploration in self, because reality is what you experience it to be, right? And then you can experience many dimensions in just your consciousness, but then what happens when technology is involved in kind of empowering your consciousness, and where can it really push you further in that capacity?
You have a couple of people join in the last minute, so I think it's worth reintroducing the exercise and the reason we're here.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can do that. So we're discussing the intersection of technology and culture, and with a perspective on whether or how either of those things affect our sense of dimensionality. And to get to a common starting ground or starting place, or reached common ground, we were beginning with a discussion around what we even understand as being dimensions, or what is dimensionality to you, if there's such a thing as a personal interpretation of that, before getting to how technology might or might not affect that. Peter talked a little bit about the mathematical and programmatical dimensions. Mariam, nice to see you.
I just came. So we are talking about tech and dimensionality of culture.
That's one way to look at it as well. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I'm just preparing my points and I can jump back in. My video is just lagging, just fixing it up.
No problem. Yeah, I think what interests me in this topic is really just this idea of where can we go. I know that, yeah, where can we go in our consciousness to experience other dimensions, and what does that mean? Of course, it's not just technology that allows that. Nature also can take you to other dimensions to explore. But the opportunity for technology to facilitate our experiences in different ways and open new perspectives in terms of consciousness is super interesting. On a more physical perspective, right? This idea that you are entering a different world sometimes when you think about a metaverse is also super interesting.
But do you want to continue?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to say about it rather than just setting that prompt. So exploring really what does dimensionality mean to you? If it was really about this kind of exploration of different capacities of our consciousness, what is the role of technology? The main prompt, the question that we sent out also to our community as an invitation to this session was really, how does technology challenge our accepted reality? And which other dimensions can we access with this technology? And then, of course, what does it mean about our experience both of life and of death? Be really curious to hear how you all felt about that and what it prompted you to come to this session. Yeah, Peter, go ahead. No need to raise your hand. We're a small enough group for everyone to just kind of jump in.
Well, I think technology has really changed my sense of place. Before the internet came along, you always thought of yourself as being part of your community, and community was defined by where you physically were. And now we have the opportunity to choose our community. And it doesn't matter that I'm here in New York and the tech people that I'm interested in working with are over based in London and Amsterdam and all around the world. Suddenly that whole notion of distance has just been completely collapsed and imploded. And now it's communities of interest that define place to me as opposed to geography.
Yeah, absolutely. And that came up in our conversation on community just last time. So it is a form of dimension to experience, right? Your interactions with other people. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, so I was thinking about Doctor Strange and how the multiverses they are creating and coexisting with technology. There is a universe beyond that, and with culture, dimensionality. I think movies that are exploring all this is making us think that maybe we are just dust in this part of the world with tiny stars, and there's a lot of us that exist beyond that. And with the discovery of black hole, I think 3 weeks ago with the NASA, and with that release of the movie, I think technology is making us a bit cynical also about how we view ourselves, and maybe how our death and everything is coexisting, and our particles are rejuveniling. I don't know. It's just a theory that is coming right now. So these are some points that I'm just brainstorming right now.
I think that's why cinema is so keen on exploring multiverses. Is it just me, or has that become sort of a meme in TV and cinema recently? As in that's one take on dimensions, in a very literal sense, that there's no end to the films that seem to take that as a core plot point.
And films are a form of culture, right? And so when we think about film creation, it's coming from a place of culture, but at the same time, this kind of future focused exploration, when we think about dimensionality, I guess it is often explored or kind of influenced by existing cultures as well. And then they borrow and kind of combine and create new forms of existence or realms. It's very interesting that so far our conversation has really tied our experience of community to dimensionality, which wasn't something that I'd considered before.
Yeah, taking that point and the conversation, it's just like we are all exploring ourselves while being in different communities, and we are also wondering how people are interacting towards the technology and how this dimension will be in another community, maybe in a way that we are coexisting, and how we look each other with what we are and how our opinions and perspectives about coexisting and co-working is in collaborating works, I think. And maybe that's how technology is playing one positive role and bringing us that bridge that we all are having that same emotional data and rationality, but it's just making us more similar in a way that we are coexisting.
It's kind of like convergence and divergence, right? Like it accelerates both somehow in a way that, it's just constantly transforming what it is, what our experience of reality is.
And whatever one's reality is, that keeps changing. It doesn't remain the same. It's like, I will give another book reference or the movie reference, because the pop culture is influenced by the scientific discoveries and the science fiction world. So Inception and Matrix are the movies that were ahead of their times, and maybe Christopher Nolan plays on that technology and culture and communities, and how our versions of ourselves is also different in other world. So
Yeah, the dimensionalities, like different experiences, allow us to explore different parts of us that we might not necessarily feel comfortable exploring in this physical reality. Super interesting.
I think that touches on the point of identity, which I would say it's one of the things I'm most apprehensive about, which is that I believe there's a rupture between the physical being and their digital identity, I would say. And I would say psychologically, it's easy to get lost between the two.
Do you get lost between the two?
Sorry?
Do you feel like you get lost between the two?
I'd say not yet, because I don't believe we are fully immersed yet in those other dimensions, but I do believe there's a certain risk to it. I don't know, maybe people losing the notion of touch, I would say not touch, but physical contact and relations with other beings outside of that digital dimension that technology can provide. I'm not saying we're doomed or something like that. I just say that I do believe it's something that people that are projecting those technologies need to think about.
But do you see things like the way that we game? And so I'm trying to sort of tease apart your remark. And so, for example, when we create avatars in gamers are notoriously angry at the world, and perhaps that has something to do with sort of putting so much of their identity into characters. Do you think, is that sort of what you're talking about, or is it more about being sort of behind an anonymous username on a forum, for example, and nobody really seeing you for who you are? There's a bit of both.
I'd say a bit of both, and especially with I don't know, digital personalities. I mean, like influencers, and you're projecting a life that is not. It's most likely not your actual life. So you're essentially creating a narrative and an image of yourself that might be different from your actual self. So, this is the point where I do believe there is this rupture. So it's almost like everyone is acting.
How do you know what your actual self actually is?
I don't believe we know that. I don't think we have this self-perception. I think we have a projected image of ourselves already, but the way in which we interact with the world is different. So I think there might be this disconnection between how you interact with the real world versus how you interact in the digital world. And at the same time, I do believe that technology has the ability, the possibility to empower people. So at the same time, this dimensionality can be beneficial to some people, and this image that they can create for themselves, I do believe has some good aspects. So I don't know, it's not an absolute question.
Maybe technology has made people the editor button where they can try to project their one perfect self to the world while working on their own versions. And maybe having mobiles is like a narrative that you want to set up for the world to see you. But many influencers and people are trying to rewire the real versions of themselves by plugging how they are in actual life. Only few of that people are doing that, are comfortable in sharing that narrative. But while the technology has connected us, it has also greatly disconnected with the human touch, with human interpersonal relationships, and with the co-working spaces becoming more and more remote. I think we as a community might lose touch of our in-person spaces if we are not together. We might become very loner or alone if we shift all together to the remote learning and remote meetings and interpersonal meetups.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had this idea when both Ivan and you were sharing that this idea of other dimensions, or exploring ourselves in other dimensions. Is it really just a mirror that shows us what our existence is regardless? Because we are still creating, we are still projecting, we are still conformed, we're still responding to constructs, and maybe even just thought is a technology of sorts. I don't know. And then also, Mariam, when you were talking about this ability to create the perfect self, is that ever really true? Can we actually in other dimensions create our perfect self? Because we definitely can't do it in physical reality, right? I don't think anyone would ever admit to themselves being absolutely perfect. And I feel like that would apply the same in that same thought would be the same in other dimensions. And what does that say about us and our consciousness, that we are unable to, well, first that we have this concept of perfection and we aspire to it, and not everyone, but that there is this aspiration towards perfection, or this ideal of perfection, and that we can also never achieve it. Technology helps us experiment and explore, but what happens when there is that realization that, you know, even with this new opportunity or this new dimensionality that I can escape to, I can achieve what it is that I aspire to or struggle with, and trying to fix.
Yeah, I'm getting your point, and I'm good understanding the perspective, because when we go away from our roots as humans, we feel a lot of disconnect, and the image that we are trying to portray as perfect, it doesn't exist. Our illusions become delusional, and then we become a bit of jaded in a way that our journey is taking us through the technology, through what we are trying to bring on the surface. But we as humans, we as consumers and producers and creators, we need to rewire ourselves by being, because we care too much about the society and community, that we think, oh, if we will bring this up or be vulnerable or be human, which is what we are at the core, then we will be judged and our perfectionist image will be broken and our illusion will become like, oh, that doesn't exist. But actually, we are imperfect in the way we are in the communities, in our technology, in our co-working spaces. And the more we accept that, I think the more it will become more human than the robotic. People feel proud when they say, I don't feel this, or I do not do this, or we are very perfect in this um, place of online world. But the thing is, when these these versions of ourselves are very different when we are in the physical places and when we are with ourselves. As there's this Japanese saying also, that you are a lot of versions to a lot of people in different spaces and dimensionality, but who you are is what is the journey about. And if you know yourself, then you will be less conscious about what you're projecting out there. And why do you even, yes, we all feel bit of conscious when we are projecting ourselves out there, but do we really care about what the society thinks? Because at the end of the day, we are being judged either this way or that way.
And also we're stardust, right?
Yeah, the 42 number by Hitchhiker's Guide Galaxy book, he said, the ultimate question is who we are, what is the answer? And all that speculative fiction is real because it is derived from the reality. And we are projecting ourselves into the Zen spaces, and we are energies because we do catch up on that even through the technology. We compare our lives on Instagram. We work to aspire someone else, but we are not looking at our own trajectory of who we were before this or who we were after this. If we compare our versions with ourselves, I think that will bring a lot of humanity and a peace with the technology also, because technology is, in the end, is helping us. This Zoom meeting is happening in different countries because of technology, just the way we see it.
It's beautiful, Mariam. Do you think technology could do that better somehow? Or
Yeah, I wish we
instigate
can,
positive change?
yeah, I wish we can teleport each other, and maybe that can be the best technology ever created. If we can like zoom in the windows and go in this place and go in that place, that Christopher Nolan's Inception might play here if scientists can bring something like that in dimensionality world.
It could also get really messy.
Yeah. But yeah, there should be like boundaries and rules to
Well,
lock into
privacy
rules.
becomes, privacy and security just become exponentially more important, right? Then how do you define boundaries in a world like that, right?
Yeah, for every breaking rules will be antivirus also for that teleportation and the windows and all that, I guess. While you're working for something, we need to have an antivirus for it. Like it's like cons and pros have to be there. As humans, we are yin and yang. So I guess that spectrum is there.
I'm becoming particularly sensitive to the power and potential of shared collective visions and imagination. There's a great trope called defictionalization, and the notion that some products that were created in fictional universes catch on and get so much interest in people that they wind up bringing them forward into the real world. And how you could have imaginary organizations, then people go and decide that, well, let's get together and do this for real. So if you can create a compelling enough vision, it's possible to really shift action in the real world in major ways. I think maybe that's part of why there's so much passion over how Disney Corporation has utterly destroyed the vision of Epcot. So you have the Futureport project. I don't know, have you ever seen Futureport 82? Basically, some enthusiasts for how Epcot Center was originally constructed went out and got a copy of the thing and used Unreal Engine for it. And he got people to send in little snippets of video and footage they had from their different trips to the park. And over the course of a couple of years, he's managed to create a simulation of Epcot as it looked during the 1982 season with incredible detail. Let me find a link to you and I'll paste that into the chat. Really remarkable. Let's see, Futureport.
Why 82 in particular?
Well, that was when the park first opened and it was holding true to its original vision. The original mission of Epcot was to inform, entertain, inform, and inspire. And the idea was that the effort to, you got it, Luma, perfect, that's the link. That trying to inspire the next generation to go and build a future we'd want to live in. And the actual notion of embracing real technology and reality in the theme park so that you could introduce people to the possibilities of science as opposed to it just being pure imagination was very strong. So the original Epcot, the pavilions were centered on possible worlds that were actually possible. And you went to the Living Seas and it was centered on the notion of a trip down to Seabase Alpha, which was a fictionalized representation of an undersea colony, but they played it straight. And that was the whole point of why people got so passionate about the park back then. It was pitched to adults. There weren't any cartoon characters running around. And it was all about embracing a vision for the future that you'd want to live in. And then we had the Living Seas with Nemo, and they started injecting cartoon characters, and then they tore out the universe of energy so they could make room for the absurd Guardians of the Galaxy ride and utterly destroyed it. So even though the rides are newer and fancier, and they might even have higher tech on the park, people who were there during the original era can see that there's this palpable sense that it's not the same park anymore. The vision has been completely lost. It's not a future you want to live in. It's a big, giant, rolling 3D ad that you pay through the nose so that you can be propagandized to go out and watch more movies and buy more junk fiction loaded with cliche after cliche. And it's not about the future anymore. It's just about moving merchandise and selling cross ties to other things. And it's not the Disney that we grew up on. So there's been such a tremendous reaction. I also want to find a link. I'll give you another link in a minute to a film that one of the Disney, let's see, one moment. Right. Here we are. I have the link for you. Joshua Harris, who worked for Disney for about 20 years, was the leading figure in trying to get them to bring Epcot back to its original vision of a positive, reachable future, as opposed to just another park with fantasy in it. There's a link. He did a marvelous little movie you can watch. If you have any issues with blinky lights causing you epileptic issues, you'll want to look away and just listen to it. But otherwise, it's definitely a must-see. And it's an argument for bringing the park back to that original vision. So you have that link there.
It's a little bit of what the expos are trying to do. It's in the same vein, the World Fairs, the expos.
Yeah.
But I would agree that at least the two most recent ones that I got to visit felt ambitious but bland, as in very little in terms of actual foresight and a lot of showing off of how responsible the countries are, but not so much about what's next.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking about the expos and this idea of experimenting with alternate realities. Like even the Truman Show was this experiment of building an alternate reality and seeing what happens when you experience it. So what is it about humans and communities and cultures that are drawn to that type of exploration of other dimensionalities. Why are we drawn to them, and what role has technology had in helping us explore that? I also think about Elon Musk's ambition, although not to really bring him into this conversation, but this idea that Neuralink is this idea of an ultimate tech solution to consciousness, or a tech optimizer for consciousness. Not sure what it looks like yet, or what the actual capacity is, but I guess we still don't understand what the need would be for us to know what the solution should be.
Yeah, that was Elon Musk TED talk where he in depth went through that we will have our brains connected to the wires, and I don't know, a lot of things that isn't even possible, what he was saying. But yeah, but he has been to the space and Mars, so I don't know how he will be able to do that, the wires. Then we will be not humans if he malfunctions with the brain and the wires and makes us be someone else. I don't know, that can bring a very distorted reality and might distort our cells, neurons.
Yeah, I mean, dimensionality, experience of dimensionality happens in our mind, right? That's the only place that it actually happens. Yes, you might experience things or be stimulated physically, but the processing of that experience happens in the mind. So even when, to Ivan's point, like intimacy or touch is something that we're still not able to recreate in AR or VR, in the metaverse. But ultimately, if we can simulate that, what does that mean to our experience in life, but also through community and through building culture?
Yeah, the metaverses and NFTs and Web3, VR and AR, it's really like a complex universe that if we do not get it right, we might get lost in it, or we might become radio signal transmission that's gone wrong if it's not experimented in the right way, I think, because we are going rapidly into the fast zone of technology, and we are trying to get ahead of our times, and while doing so, I think we need to be calculated in our technological advancements that we are trying to do. The scientists, the technologists, and the people behind that. So a lot of weight and shift have to be there. Even books like 1984, I, Robot, Back to the Future movies, these predicted future which is happening right now in some ways. But yeah, it's a scary world right now with this dimensionality.
Maybe we picked a challenging theme.
I think what's nice about it being challenging is that it really pushes it's pushed me so far in this conversation to really even think about what the issues are, and that, you know, a lot of the times we blame technology, or we salute technology, when ultimately technology is also just a product of our consciousness.
It's a collective effort.
And do we need to rethink our relationship with technology in experiencing reality here and be like physically and virtually, in order to truly understand what the opportunity is?
Yeah, you make sense because 22 years ago, when the internet was launched and the dial-up connections, we never would have thought that we would have come this advanced world of tech with having to have the conversations and having to have the gadgets, the technology, the mixed realities that we are experiencing. I think we are the lucky generation that has seen the both of the best of the both worlds with the dial-up connections, with the human speed and catching up with that nature speed and rapid technology advancements. But uh, I don't know, but we need to come into the middle place where we make peace with technology is here to help us, and it is, but then there's always pros and cons with everything that is associated in our work life and in our life generally.
Oh, I dropped a link to a fascinating website. Someone went off and created an imaginary web presence for the fictional Delos Corporation that was the corporate entity that supposedly created the Westworld and Future World parks from the 1970s movie franchise that later became the miniseries on television. So they basically play it straight as if there really was a corporation creating themed robot staff destination resorts, and the whole thing's played straight. It's really fun to just crawl through and poke around. It's almost as if it's really, you have to wonder who is behind creating that. Was it an offshoot of the show? Was it an offshoot of fans? Is there someone who's actually thinking about trying to implement it and defictionalize it? I also put a link to the defictionalization trope in the chat a while back. So really fun to play with this, blurring the line between collective imagination and future actions.
It's a little bit like those alternate reality games that were fad a couple of years ago. I mean, they haven't gone away entirely, but alternate reality in the sense, so not so much augmented, but really embedded in the real world, but with phone numbers that lead to clues that take you to websites that lead you to further clues, but embedding a game in actuality, in reality, and having that be visible only to those who know they're playing the game. That was more than a trope. I think that was actualized for a while, but didn't seem to stick unless there's a bunch of them that I don't know of, probably participating in. They would use that same approach of creating websites for things that exist in the fictional world, then as if they were real.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear if anyone has kind of challenged their view of reality by exploring other dimensionalities in any form, if it's even just like, sometimes you'll go into a VR experience and you'll like walk off the ledge and then realize how scary that might seem, even though in physical life, that you're not going to fall, but it's so hard to like just move your leg and take a step to the left because you're in this perceptive world that is so scary because it's like a drop of 500 meters. So has anyone had an experience that has kind of provoked or challenged their experience of reality? And then of course, we've talked about death a lot and what are technologies doing to really expand our sense of death and welcome it or even fear it more?
Yeah, I like that point of intersection because I did experience one game, I've forgotten that, where I actually thought that I'm on the edge with the virtual reality I was playing, and it was like on the edge, and I was not taking the step, even though I knew in reality I was here. But it was so real that I, for a second, thought that I'm gonna die, and that this is it. This is how the video game will be the end to my adventure, and trying to experiment that, because it has become really real because you have immersed in that zone, and even though in the back of the mind you're thinking that no, this is not real, I am in some other space, but as you progress in the video game world and see the reality, you actually do get to see that for a little while you have disconnected from the real world, and your subconscious plays with you while you're wearing VR and AR technology, and it's very real. When you're playing the game for like half an hour or something, you lose track of time and you lose the reality around. And sometimes it liberates you from the fear of death, that what will happen. You might save or you might not, but if it's written, you might. But it makes you face your fears through technology, because in reality, you're not actually there on the edge of the mountain or playing games, but it prepares you for maybe when you're out there, you might be able to be a bit prepared to face that. So maybe it liberates that this type of technology sometimes liberates you from the real experiences that you actually want to experience, like go on the mountain trek and be on the edge and then experience that, but obviously in a calculated way.
I just dropped a couple of links to the story of the Latitude Society, which I think is what Michelle was alluding to before about the attempt to do the secret society in real life.
That might be one. I mean, might be one of those. Yeah. As in, I'm sure there's more than these guys. See it here. There was one called The Beast that was created for the film Artificial Intelligence in 2002. Yeah, there's a bunch of descriptions about how convoluted and deep these websites actually went. And the whole thing was kicked off by a detail in the teaser trailer for the film. I think like they had a title for someone who's like an AI psychologist. And then if you Googled her name, you would end up in this rabbit hole of pre-generated websites. Yeah, Janine Sala. It was the psychologist. I'm dropping the Wikipedia link in the chat. This was a big, and then there was a bunch of them that sort of followed in the same model. I think when Halo was launched, they also did a bunch of ARGs, video game.
And then you have to wonder whether anyone might be using one of those for recruitment for a real organization and just masquerading it as a fake organization.
Those are interesting dimensions.
Probably make a good movie plot. Then you wonder, what's the game? Where does the game end? Where does reality start?
And then you also think about kids who are growing up in Roblox. Like for them, they don't go to the playground anymore. They just go into Roblox and into these different, I guess also playgrounds, but virtual playgrounds, and are growing up in those spaces. And what implications does that have?
Yeah.
And are they things that we should be considering? Or is it just another playground?
My nieces and nephews are very much addicted to Roblox, and they are like, we have made virtual friends where we meet on some park, even though it's all virtual, but they say that it's giving them the real experience of how it is to interact with people, go to the other playgrounds, buy something, make their own things, and have friends while they're interacting. I've seen them online playing how Roblox works, and it's a very fascinating, but then it takes away the real playground with nature. That takes away that. And I don't know, are these games helping them? Because when I was a kid, I was playing games like Need for Speed, FIFA, Burnout, and in some limited time edition, but I was going out to play also, because that was very important as human, to have that connect with the nature, because nature heals us and nature makes us interact with other kids also. So this is very like scary to be online with how our generation of kids are growing up with Roblox and Fortnite also, these multiplayer games.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe it's just, it is what it is, and it's just part of evolution in some form, right? Like that we're expanding into other realities and spending more time there. And it's just part of something that we acknowledge without necessarily having to think about it too much.
Absolutely, the multiplayer games was that way for us, but I think multiplayer games have changed and they have become more like virtual reality metaverses, in where we are actually interacting with other people while creating different spaces while being in one space or other, because multiplayer gameplay was very different back then. It has very much evolved, as you have mentioned. So
Yeah, it's become community, and it's become,
yes.
it's become community driven. I guess the question on a personal note for everyone is, do you, we're coming out of the pandemic. Well, we don't know if we're coming out of it, but we've had some indication or learning over the pandemic that there is a real experience of online fatigue, like digital fatigue, and that as useful as this technology is to enter this dimensionality through the screen, we do, to your point, Maryam, really value nature. If the world was driven to that, would you be okay with living through a screen, through an alternate reality other than the physical one?
I think no, because I think it will make us very like what is predicted in the books and pop culture and what scientists also say in science fiction movies. If we are only experiencing world through a screen, then we might lose our sanity. We might not have the experience of what is real and what is not, because of so much digital screen time and fatigue and not having to have it. Just reminded me of that movie Her, that was like being in a technological space. You lose the concept of people to people when you're so much online. And of course, with the pandemic, from one zone to another zone, we have been like so individual, and now we are so community driven. But if we bring two of it together, interdependent and independent, maybe then we can have a balance with the technology. Because if we are stuck in the spaces of digital, we might lose our sense of well-being and sanity point, I guess.
What about you, Michelle?
I'm spaced out by all the potential dimensions that we've covered, as in they're each a vector, right? If you talk nature, then there are numerous dimensions in nature. If you talk the digital, there are an equivalent number of dimensions in the digital, or in the mental, or in the spiritual, and so on and so forth. So the fact that there are so many dimensions to traverse, and that we share so many of them, I find, it's fascinating. And I guess that different technologies bring us closer to different dimensions. But they're arguably too numerous to even start listing, right? We could have picked one and still spent a week just discussing that.
Yeah.
Digital dimensions, for example, or games.
And then also there's, from this conversation and also most conversations, there's a clear indication of a priority or a need to attach oneself to the physical dimension, right? And I know you referenced that nature also has its own multidimensionality, but the one that we live in a finite, conformed society and have our cultures and structures and systems, which is also just interesting. That I'm also feeling really lost, like there are all these mirrors kind of reflecting all these dimensions right back to this one that we all seem to use as a common denominator somehow.
Peter, thanks for the I know Mortal Kombat trope. I had not seen that, but I think yeah, it sounds like engineer's disease. When you're good at one thing and you think you can extrapolate from that and be good at other things as well. It feels like something a lot of people fall into.
Yeah, there's a whole network of related tropes out of that. So it's fun to play around, explore that corner of their wiki.
What do you think,
Yeah.
Peter? Are we living in a simulation?
Probably not.
How come?
Yeah, the resolution's too good.
Nice.
It's been an intense hour, and I think we've covered a lot of dimensions. Before I know some people are leaving, and before we wrap up, we'll, as Luna mentioned, we'll be on a break for the next few months, and we'll reconvene in fall or spring, depending on where you are. And the next topic, or the topic for the next session, which I believe is scheduled for early September, is language. So technology, culture, and language. And we've invited another envisioning collaborator, which some of you know, Laura Vecchio. She's doing her thesis on technology and language. It's her interest and fascination. So we'll invite her to explore a little bit, or expand a little bit on how she sees that intersection. So she'll bring some talking points, and then we'll open up a conversation around that intersection as well in a couple of months.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. I think this was an intense conversation, which is making us think, do we really need too many dimensionality talks? This was an experiment. So what will happen if everything becomes dimensional?
My hunch is if we had focused on one, we would have ended up going this way anyways. So yeah.
Doctor Strange universe is being reminded.
Most enjoyable as always.